Security laughed at the poor single dad. Huh? Keep walking before I call someone who can make it worse. They laughed as security blocked the poor single dad at the barricade. They saw worn boots, a tired child, and a man they thought didn't belong near power. But he didn't argue, panic, or beg. Minutes later, the street would learn who they had mocked. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Some people confuse appearance with worth, until truth humiliates arrogance. Before anyone saw the moment the president's motorcade stopped for the man security mocked, the truth was already standing in steel-toed boots, holding a little girl's hand like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. The guard at the outer barricade smirked like he'd been handed a joke. Behind him, polished SUVs rolled into formation beside the Civic Plaza, black paint gleaming under the sun. Metal barriers cut the avenue into zones of importance. One side belonged to officials, cameras, and people wearing badges clipped to tailored jackets. The other belonged to workers, delivery vans, and anybody expected to stay invisible. The man in the faded jacket didn't look invisible to his daughter. She held his hand with both of hers, backpack hanging crooked over one shoulder, looking up at him as if his answer would settle the whole world. Elias Mercer squeezed her fingers once and kept his voice even. He was tired enough to feel it behind his eyes, but there was no anger in the way he stood, only a stillness that made the laughter around him feel cheap. The lunch pail in his free hand was dented. His boots were dusty. The patch on his maintenance jacket had frayed at one corner. None of it explained the posture that hadn't learned how to wilt. He looked past the barricade, not at the insult, but at the line of temporary fencing, the concrete planters, the route markers sprayed near the curb. His gaze moved with quiet precision, as if the street were a page he already knew how to read. Leela shifted closer to his side. Her face had gone small and careful, the way children's faces do when they understand something hurtful is happening and don't yet know where to put it. That was the part that hit him. Not the guard's contempt, not the snickers from two contract officers near the press lane. It was seeing his daughter learn, in real time, how quickly strangers measured human worth by a pair of worn sleeves. He bent slightly, enough to bring himself nearer to her eye level. The plaza smelled like hot concrete, engine exhaust, and roasted nuts from a cart pushed blocks away from the perimeter. Sirens muttered in the distance. Helicopter blades thudded faintly overhead. "You stay right by me," he said. She nodded. "I am." That studied him more than anything else. Elias had spent the last 3 years building a life out of smaller rooms, tighter budgets, and promises he never let himself break. Up before dawn. Work orders all day. Pickup after school. Cheap dinners that still felt warm because Leela laughed over them. The city had given him a maintenance route through the government plaza because nobody in power noticed who kept the pipes, lights, and service corridors working beneath marble buildings. That was fine with him. Places like this often revealed more from underneath than they ever did from the front entrance. A woman in a tailored navy coat crossed the inner lane, speaking into an earpiece while agents adjusted positions around her. Chief Miranda Kent moved like the whole plaza belonged to her, shoulders square, jaw set, every glance sharp enough to cut. She took one look at Elias, then at Leela, then at the maintenance badge clipped to his chest, and dismissed them both with the efficiency of someone used to deciding which lives mattered in less than a second. Elias said nothing. But something at the far edge of the route tightened inside him. A barrier foot near the eastern curb sat at the wrong angle. Not much. Barely noticeable. Yet it was enough to interrupt the clean geometry of the perimeter. Beside it, a utility cover showed fresh scoring around one bolt. New scrape marks. Recent. The hair at the back of his neck rose before his mind finished naming why. He inhaled once, slow and deep. Beneath the diesel fumes and city heat, another scent seemed to flicker in memory, sharp and metallic, dragged from a place in his past he kept buried for his daughter's sake. Then the distant sirens grew louder. The president's motorcade was coming, and the street in front of Elias suddenly felt less like a road than a fuse. The guard was still grinning when the first black SUV rolled into view at the far end of the avenue. Sirens echoed between the glass towers surrounding the plaza, bouncing off steel and marble until the whole street vibrated with authority. Engines growled in a low, synchronized rhythm that felt almost mechanical, like a moving wall of power advancing toward the barricade. Elias Mercer didn't move. Leela leaned closer to his side, her small hand still locked around his fingers. "That's the president, right?" she whispered. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Are we supposed to be this close?" "Not usually." The guard overheard and snorted. "Don't worry, kid," he said, leaning on the metal barrier. "Your dad's not getting any closer than this. Nobody without clearance crosses here." Another officer nearby laughed under his breath. Maintenance guys always think their badges work everywhere. Elias said nothing. His eyes stayed on the street. The motorcade grew larger with every passing second, sleek armored vehicles gliding forward with deliberate precision. Secret Service agents stepped into position along the inner lane, hands resting near jackets, scanning rooftops and crowd lines. But Elias wasn't looking at the vehicles. His gaze was locked on the curbside infrastructure. That crooked barrier foot again, the utility plate beside it. Something about the spacing was wrong. Not loud wrong, not dramatic, just off. 3 inches, maybe 4. He shifted his weight slightly. The movement made the guard glance at him. "What part of stay back don't you understand?" the officer said. "I'm staying back," Elias replied calmly. His voice carried no irritation, no challenge, just fact. Leela looked up at him again. "You're thinking," she said. He blinked once. "What makes you say that?" "You get that face?" He almost smiled. Before he could answer, a sharp voice cut through the plaza. Clear the outer lane, Miranda Kent stepped forward, heels clicking on the pavement with military crispness. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight knot, expression carved from impatience and authority. She looked at Elias the same way someone looks at a coffee stain on a clean table. Why is this man still standing here? The guard straightened. He says he works maintenance. Kent's gaze flicked to the badge on Elias's chest, then to the lunch pail, then to Lila. "This perimeter closed 15 minutes ago," she said sharply. "Move them out." Elias nodded slightly. "We're leaving," he said. Kent didn't reply. She had already turned away, speaking into her earpiece. Motorcade entering Sector 2, confirm barricade alignment, agents hold positions. Her voice was clipped and efficient, everything about her projected control, except the barricade foot still sat crooked. Elias exhaled slowly. He crouched beside Leela, adjusting the strap on her backpack. "You remember the rule when we walk past busy streets?" he asked softly. "Stay on your right side," she said immediately. And hold your hand." Good. The motorcade was now only a block away. Sirens dropped in volume as the vehicles slowed, shifting from urgency to controlled glide. Something tightened deeper in Elias's chest. The utility plate again. Fresh scoring around one bolt. A faint vibration hummed through the concrete under his boots, not from the approaching engines, but from something else. He straightened slowly. The guard rolled his eyes. "Still here?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the barricade, studying the base structure. The guard snapped upright. "Hey, back up." Elias pointed at the ground. "That barrier wasn't installed like that this morning," the officer scoffed. "You part of the security team now?" "No." Then move. Elias hesitated only half a second. Something underneath that plate shifted recently. The guard barked a laugh. Yeah? Maybe the wind moved it, a second officer chuckled. Maintenance guy thinks he's an engineer. Leela tugged gently on Elias's sleeve. Dad. He squeezed her hand again. I know. Behind them, pedestrians gathered behind temporary fencing, phones raised, waiting to film the presidential convoy. Camera crews adjusted tripods. Reporters whispered countdowns. Nobody noticed the crooked barrier. Nobody except the man security had just laughed at. The lead Secret Service SUV rolled toward the plaza intersection. Suddenly, the vehicle braked. Not a gradual stop. A sharp halt. The entire motorcade froze behind it in a chain reaction of armored steel. Agents stepped forward instantly, scanning the street. Kent's head snapped toward the convoy. What's happening? She demanded. An agent spoke urgently into his wrist mic. Possible obstruction near the barrier grid. Kent turned toward the curb, toward the crooked foot, toward the exact spot Elias had been staring at for the last minute. The guard beside him frowned. What the hell? Elias's jaw tightened. That vibration again. Faint, precise, mechanical. Leela felt his hand tense. Dad? His voice dropped to a whisper. Sweetheart, step back behind me. The air in the plaza changed. Agents spread outward in controlled arcs. Radios crackled. The press line went silent. And for the first time since the laughter started, Miranda Kent looked directly at Elias Mercer. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you subscribe with the bell on, because moments like what's about to happen next are exactly why these stories matter. Across the barricade, an agent crouched near the utility plate. He leaned closer, then froze. Command, he said into his mic. His voice had lost all casual tone. We may have a device. The plaza erupted into motion. Agents shouted commands. People were pushed back. Engines cut. And Elias Mercer felt the cold, unmistakable certainty settle in his chest. He had seen this pattern before, many times, in places far louder and far darker than a quiet American plaza. He exhaled once. Then stepped toward the barricade again. The guard grabbed his arm. Where do you think you're going? Elias didn't raise his voice, but his eyes had changed. Toward the problem, he said quietly. The guard's grip tightened around Elias's arm. Toward the problem? The officer repeated, You're not going anywhere near that. Across the barricade, agents were already forming a wider perimeter. Radios crackled with clipped urgency. The lead SUV's engine idled like a restless animal, while the rest of the motorcade sat frozen behind it in a line of silent armored steel. Leela pressed closer to Elias's side. What's happening? She asked softly. He kept his voice steady. Just stay behind me. Kent strode toward the barrier, heels striking the pavement in sharp beats. Her eyes locked onto the crouching agent near the utility plate. Report. The agent didn't look up. There's wiring under the plate, looks like an improvised device. We're pulling the convoy back. Kent swore under her breath. How did something like that get past the sweep? No one answered. Another agent waved the press line farther back. Reporters stumbled behind their barricade, cameras shaking as they tried to capture the sudden chaos. The guard beside Elias finally released his arm. You heard them, he said. Everyone moves back, but Elias didn't step away. His gaze remained fixed on the curbside, the crooked barrier foot, the scored bolt, the plate. And the way the agent hovering above it wasn't touching anything, just staring. Because he didn't know what he was looking at. Elias exhaled slowly. A faint hum vibrated through the concrete again. There it was, subtle, precise, mechanical timing. His stomach tightened with recognition. Sir, the guard snapped, move. Elias turned slightly toward him. That device isn't armed the way you think. The officer blinked. "Excuse me?" Kent heard it too. Her head turned sharply. "What did you just say?" Elias didn't raise his voice. "That agent shouldn't touch the plate," he said calmly. A few nearby officers scoffed. "You serious right now?" One muttered. Kent stepped closer to the barricade. "And how exactly would you know that?" Elias hesitated for half a second, not because he doubted himself, but because speaking meant reopening a door he'd spent years closing. Behind him, Lila's small hand tugged his sleeve again. "Dad." He looked down at her. The fear in her eyes was quiet but unmistakable. That decided it. He crouched in front of her. "Remember the rule when things get loud?" he asked. She nodded. "You stay right here and listen to the officers." Okay, he stood again. Kent was watching him now with open irritation. "You have 5 seconds to step away from this barricade," she said coldly. Elias gestured toward the plate. That device was planted using the maintenance access under the barrier grid, and Agent frowned. "How would you?" "It's not pressure-triggered," Elias continued calmly, "and it's not a timer." Kent crossed her arms. "Oh, this should be good," the guard next to him snorted. "Let me guess," he said. "You watched a documentary once." Elias ignored him. His eyes stayed on the utility cover. "The vibration you're hearing isn't from the motorcade," he said quietly. "It's a signal loop." That caught someone's attention. The crouching agent looked up. "Signal loop?" Elias nodded once. "Remote trigger system." The plaza went still. Kent's expression hardened. "You're speculating." "No," Elias said. "Then explain how you're so confident." He met her gaze. For the first time since the confrontation started, something in his posture shifted. Not aggression. Authority. Quiet. Unshakable. Because whoever built that device expects the bomb squad to follow standard removal procedure, the crouching agent slowly stood. "What happens if we do?" Elias pointed toward the barrier. The plate lifts, the loop breaks, and the trigger fires. Silence rippled through the officers. Kent's jaw tightened. "You're telling me you understand the construction of an explosive device planted under a presidential route?" "Yes, and you expect me to believe that?" He didn't answer immediately. The sirens in the distance faded as police closed surrounding streets. Helicopter blades thumped louder overhead. The plaza felt smaller by the second. Finally, Kent spoke again. "Step away from the barricade," she said. Now, Elias looked back at the plate, then at the agent standing uncertainly beside it, then at Lila. His daughter stood exactly where he'd left her, watching him with the same steady trust she'd always had. That trust mattered more than the humiliation, more than Kent's suspicion, more than the guard's laughter. Elias took a slow breath. Then he stepped forward. The guard lunged again. "Hey!" Kent raised a hand. "Stop!" Everyone froze. She studied Elias carefully now, not dismissively, assessing. "What's your name?" she asked. "Elias." "Elias what?" "Mercer." Kent glanced at the badge on his jacket. "Maintenance tech, that's the job I have." Her eyes narrowed. "And the job you had before that?" Elias didn't answer immediately. The crouching agent shifted uneasily. "Chief, if he's right about the trigger loop," Kent held up a finger, still watching Elias. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Mercer?" He gestured toward the barricade again. "That device can't be approached from above." Kent's voice cooled. "And yet you seem very certain about that." "I am." The plaza fell into a tense hush. Finally, Kent spoke again. "You're either very brave," she said slowly, "or very stupid." Elias looked back at the plate, then at the silent motorcade, then at the men and women who were waiting for someone to make the next decision. His voice stayed calm. "I'm neither." Kent crossed her arms again. "Then what are you?" Elias Mercer answered quietly. The guy who knows how that bomb works. The words settled over the plaza like a sudden drop in temperature. The guy who knows how that bomb works? For a moment, nobody spoke. The helicopters thudded overhead, stirring dust along the barricades. Secret Service agents shifted positions with disciplined urgency, while officers forced the growing crowd farther back. News cameras tilted toward the curb, catching every tense movement. Miranda Kent studied Elias Mercer carefully now. The laughter was gone from her expression, but the suspicion remained. "You're claiming expertise," she said. "That's a serious statement near a presidential route." Elias didn't flinch. "I know." Kent glanced toward the agent standing beside the utility plate. "What do you see?" The agent crouched again, careful not to touch the metal cover. "Thin wiring beneath the plate looks like it's feeding into something inside the service channel," he said. "But we can't confirm the trigger type without lifting it." Elias spoke before Kent responded. "If you lift it, the signal loop breaks." The agent's head turned sharply. "That's exactly what I just said," Elias added. Kent folded her arms tighter. "Anyone can repeat a guess. Not a guess. Then what?" Elias looked down at the barrier again, the crooked footing, the shaved bolt head, the vibration humming faintly beneath the concrete. Every piece of it formed a pattern his mind recognized instantly. He'd seen variations of it in places where the air smelled like burned metal and dust instead of city exhaust. "Two-stage circuit," he said quietly. The crouching agent blinked. "You can see that from here?" Elias nodded once. "The vibration is the transmitter." Kent frowned. "What transmitter?" Elias pointed toward the barricade line 20 feet down the curb. Secondary relay. Several agents followed the direction of his finger. One of them moved toward the indicated barrier. Kent raised a hand immediately. "Stop." The agent froze. Kent looked back at Elias. "You expect me to trust the judgment of a man I've never met who wandered into a restricted security zone 10 minutes ago?" "No," Elias replied calmly. Kent's eyebrow lifted. "Then what do you expect? That you listen long enough to keep someone from dying." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Behind the barricade, reporters leaned forward, trying to catch every detail. Police continued pushing civilians back from the perimeter. Leela stood quietly where Elias had told her to stay. Her eyes never left him. Kent noticed the child now. Her gaze lingered for a second longer than before. Then she turned back to Elias. "You're saying this device was placed under the maintenance access, yes, and you know that because the bolts were replaced." Kent glanced at the plate again. "They look intact to me." "They're not," Elias said. "One of them was shaved and reseated." The crouching agent leaned closer. A second later, he exhaled sharply. "Chief, he's right." Kent's jaw tightened. "That still doesn't explain how he knows the trigger configuration." Elias shifted slightly. His boots scraped faintly against the pavement. The sound carried a strange weight in the quiet. "Remote signal loop," he repeated. "Probably tied to a secondary transmitter down the barricade line." Kent glanced toward the barrier Elias had pointed out earlier. Then back at him. "You're very confident, yes. And if you're wrong?" Elias didn't hesitate. "Then the bomb squad follows standard protocol and someone dies anyway." Silence again. The crouching agent spoke carefully. "Chief, the bomb team is still 3 minutes out." Kent's fingers drummed once against her arm. 3 minutes. 3 minutes with the presidential convoy sitting directly above a possible explosive. 3 minutes while cameras rolled and hundreds of people watched from behind barricades. 3 minutes for a remote trigger operator to decide the moment. Kent looked at Elias again. You still haven't explained something. What's that? How a maintenance technician knows anything about explosive trigger systems. Elias exhaled slowly. The smell of heated pavement drifted through the air. His mind flickered through images he rarely allowed himself to revisit: dust storms, desert roads, metal shells buried under broken asphalt. Places where hesitation cost lives. He met Kent's gaze. I used to disarm them. Kent didn't respond. The agent beside the plate did. You what? Explosive ordnance disposal, Elias said. The plaza seemed to contract around the words. Kent studied him again, this time not as an inconvenience, as a variable. How long? 10 years. The crouching agent straightened fully now. Chief, if that's true, Kent raised a hand. Her eyes remained locked on Elias. Why are you working city maintenance? Elias didn't answer immediately. Behind him, Leela shifted slightly. He glanced back at her. That single look told Kent more than any explanation. Family, loss, life rebuilt. Kent inhaled slowly. Then she turned toward the crouching agent again, confirmed the bolts. The agent leaned down, examining the plate with greater care. A few seconds passed. Then he nodded. He's right. Kent looked back at Elias Mercer, the man security had laughed at. The man wearing a frayed maintenance jacket, the man who claimed to understand the bomb beneath the president's motorcade. Her voice dropped lower. If you're lying, you're interfering with a federal security operation. Elias nodded. I understand, and if you're telling the truth. She glanced toward the frozen motorcade. Then you're the only person here who knows what that thing will do next. Elias looked down at the utility plate again. The faint vibration pulsed through the pavement once more. His jaw tightened. We don't have long, he said quietly, because whoever planted it, he pointed toward the barricade line, is probably watching us right now. Elias's quiet words hung in the air like a warning nobody wanted to hear. Miranda Kent slowly turned her head, scanning the line of barricades stretching down the curb. Beyond them stood dozens of people, reporters clutching cameras, officers repositioning patrol units, civilians pressed behind fencing with phones raised high. Any one of them could be watching. Any one of them could be waiting. Kent exhaled sharply through her nose. Everyone freeze the perimeter, she ordered into her radio. Nobody moves anything on that barricade line without my authorization. Agents immediately echoed the command. Perimeter hold, barrier hold, no contact with grid. The crouching agent stepped away from the utility plate carefully, hands lifted slightly as if the pavement itself might bite. Elias kept his eyes on the metal cover. The vibration came again. Subtle. Regular. Like a distant heartbeat buried in concrete. He'd heard that rhythm before. A transmitter loop designed to confirm the device was still armed, meaning the operator was still listening. Kent folded her arms. You said a secondary relay might be along the barricade line. Yes. Where? Elias pointed 20 feet down the curb again, toward a barrier post sitting slightly farther from the others. That one. Several agents followed his line of sight. One of them spoke quietly. It does look slightly offset. Kent's gaze narrowed. Offset doesn't mean explosive. No, Elias agreed. But that's where I'd hide the receiver. Kent studied the barrier again. And you'd know that because... Elias didn't answer immediately. The air smelled faintly of overheated engines now. Somewhere behind the motorcade, an officer shouted instructions to reposition a patrol unit. He finally said, because it's the safest place. Kent frowned. Safest for who? For the person triggering it, the crouching agent looked back toward the barricade Elias had indicated. If he's right about the relay... Kent cut him off. We don't know that yet. Elias's voice stayed calm. You don't need to move it. Kent turned back toward him. Then how do we confirm? He pointed to the base of the barrier. Look for a micro-antenna. The agent blinked. A what? Small receiver node, Elias said. Usually no bigger than a pen tip, Kent's eyes flicked toward the barricade again. Agent Morales, yes, Chief, approached slowly. Morales nodded and began moving down the curb. Each step seemed louder than the last. The entire plaza watched. News cameras zoomed in. Civilians held their breath. Leela's fingers curled around the strap of her backpack as she stared at her father. Morales knelt beside the barrier. He leaned closer. Silence stretched across the street. Then he spoke quietly into his mic. Chief. Kent's voice sharpened. What do you see? Morales angled his flashlight toward the base of the metal post. There's something here. Kent stepped forward. What kind of something? Morales leaned closer, then slowly turned his head toward Elias. A micro-antenna. The plaza erupted into murmurs. Kent stared at the barrier, then at Elias, then back at the device beneath the utility plate. For the first time since the crisis began, doubt cracked her certainty. You identified both components from 30 feet away, she said. Elias shrugged faintly. It's not complicated if you've seen the design before. Kent's voice hardened again. You keep saying that, because it's true. Morales stood slowly. Chief, if the relay and trigger loop are both active, Kent finished the sentence for him. Then the bomb squad opening that plate would complete the circuit. Morales nodded grimly. Yes. A heavy silence fell again. The motorcade sat frozen behind them. Secret Service agents shifted positions nervously. Somewhere a helicopter banked overhead, its blades chopping the air into heavy waves. Kent's gaze returned to Elias. You're telling me the entire presidential route is sitting over a device that can't be disarmed by standard protocol? Yes, and you figured that out in under 2 minutes, yes. Kent studied him carefully. There was no arrogance in his posture, no pride, just focus, which somehow made him more unsettling than if he'd been bragging. Why didn't you tell security this earlier? She asked. Elias gave a small, tired smile. They were busy laughing. Kent's jaw tightened slightly. The guard who had grabbed Elias earlier suddenly found the pavement very interesting. Kent ignored him. Instead, she took one slow step closer to Elias. Mr. Mercer, yes, if what you're saying is correct. She glanced toward the plate again. Then this situation requires a very different approach. Elias nodded. It does. And that approach would be? He gestured toward the barricade line. First, we isolate the relay. Kent frowned. That means moving the barrier. Not removing it. Morales looked uneasy. That still risks triggering the signal loop. Elias shook his head. Not if you interrupt the transmission first. Kent crossed her arms again. And how exactly do you propose doing that? Elias lifted his dented lunch pail slightly. Kent blinked. You're joking. No, you're telling me the solution to a presidential explosive threat is inside a maintenance lunchbox? Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he unclipped the worn metal latch. The lid opened with a soft metallic click. Inside were tools, simple ones, wrenches, a voltage tester, coiled wire. Kent stared. You expect me to believe you can neutralize a bomb with plumbing tools? Elias closed the lid halfway again. They're not plumbing tools. Kent folded her arms tighter. Then what are they? He looked back toward the utility plate, then toward the relay barrier, then toward the silent motorcade, and finally at Miranda Kent. They're the only tools here that won't trigger the device. He paused, then added quietly, and we're running out of time. If this moment already has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe with the bell on, because the next decision is going to change everything. Miranda Kent stared at the dented lunch pail like it had personally offended her. You're asking me to trust national security to a toolbox, she said flatly. Elias didn't react to the tone. "I'm asking you to keep that plate closed until the signal stops," he replied. Behind them, the plaza remained frozen in controlled chaos. Agents held their positions. The motorcade idled silently. Reporters whispered into cameras while officers forced the last civilians farther from the barricades. Kent's eyes flicked toward the relay barrier again. Agent Morales still stood beside it, careful not to touch the metal post. "If that antenna is the receiver," Kent said slowly, "then whoever planted the device is still transmitting." "Yes. And if they see us interfering, they might trigger it." Kent exhaled sharply. "That's exactly what I was afraid you'd say." The vibration pulsed faintly beneath Elias's boots again. Still steady. Still armed. He knelt briefly, opening the lunch pail fully this time. Inside were tools worn smooth by years of work. A compact multimeter, insulated pliers, a small coil of copper wire carefully wrapped around a screwdriver handle. Kent watched him with open disbelief. "You carry electronics equipment in your lunchbox? Sometimes pipes aren't the only thing that need fixing." Morales glanced between them. "Chief, if he's right about the signal loop, interrupting the transmission might stall the trigger." Kent looked at the relay barrier again. "And if he's wrong?" Morales didn't answer. Elias did. "Then the bomb squad arrives and opens the plate anyway." Kent's gaze snapped back to him. "You're very calm about the possibility of being wrong." Elias closed the lid of the lunch pail halfway. "I'm not wrong." His voice wasn't loud, but the certainty in it was impossible to ignore. Kent studied him carefully again. This wasn't bravado, this was recognition. Like a mechanic listening to an engine and already knowing which bolt had failed. She turned slightly toward Morales. "Bomb squad ETA? 2 minutes." Kent cursed quietly. 2 minutes meant the convoy would remain sitting above the device. 2 minutes meant the trigger operator had time to panic. Or decide. Kent looked back at Elias Mercer. "You said the relay barrier is transmitting, yes, and you believe you can interrupt that signal, yes, with those tools, yes." Kent rubbed her temple briefly. The helicopters overhead seemed louder now. The plaza smelled of tension and exhaust. She lowered her hand. "Explain." Elias pointed toward the relay barrier. "The antenna's receiving signal from a remote transmitter." Morales nodded slowly. "That matches what we're seeing." Elias continued. "If we ground the receiver, the signal collapses." Kent frowned. "Ground it how?" Elias lifted the coil of copper wire. "Direct line to the barrier frame." Morales leaned closer. "That could short the antenna." Kent crossed her arms again. "Or complete the circuit." Elias shook his head. "Not if it's done from the right point." Kent stared at him. "You keep saying things like that because they matter." She stepped closer to him now, lowering her voice. "You understand that if this goes wrong, it's not just your life on the line." Elias glanced briefly toward the motorcade. He knew exactly who sat inside one of those armored vehicles. He also knew the dozens of agents surrounding it, and the hundreds of civilians still within blast radius. "Yes," he said quietly. Kent studied his face. No fear, no hesitation, just focus, and something else she couldn't quite name. Responsibility. Finally, she looked toward Morales again. "What's the alternative?" Morales swallowed. "Bomb squad protocol would require lifting the plate." Kent closed her eyes for a second. Exactly what Mercer warned against. She opened them again. "Agent Morales, yes, Chief. You will not touch that relay barrier unless instructed, yes, Chief." Kent turned back to Elias. "You get 30 seconds." Morales blinked. "Chief, 30 seconds," Kent repeated. The plaza seemed to tighten around the decision. Elias nodded once. "That's enough." He picked up the lunch pail and stepped toward the barricade. The guard who had mocked him earlier instinctively moved aside. This time, no one laughed. Leela watched him go with wide eyes. "Dad." Elias glanced back at her. "Stay with the officers," he said gently. She nodded. He turned back toward the relay barrier. Morales stepped aside as Elias approached. The antenna was barely visible at the base of the metal post, a tiny silver pin no larger than a grain of rice. Elias crouched slowly, every movement deliberate, careful. Kent watched from 3 steps away. "How long?" she asked quietly. 10 seconds, the vibration under the pavement pulsed again. Stronger this time. Elias slid the copper wire from the screwdriver handle. One end touched the barrier frame. The other hovered near the antenna node. Morales whispered under his breath, "Please let this work." Kent didn't speak. The plaza had fallen into absolute silence. Even the reporters stopped talking. Elias steadied his hand. The copper wire brushed the antenna tip. For half a second, nothing happened. Then, the vibration under the pavement stopped. Completely. Elias exhaled slowly. Morales stared at the ground. Signals gone. Kent blinked. "You're certain?" Morales checked his scanner again. No transmission. Elias stood. "That buys us time." Kent looked toward the utility plate. The device beneath it was now silent. Dormant. Not safe. But no longer connected. She turned back to Elias Mercer, the maintenance worker security had laughed at, the man who had just disabled a remote trigger using tools from his lunchbox. Kent spoke quietly. "Who exactly are you?" Elias didn't answer her question immediately. The sudden silence beneath the pavement had changed the atmosphere of the entire plaza. For the first time since the motorcade stopped, the faint vibration was gone. The ground felt still underfoot, as if the street itself had taken a breath. Agent Morales continued staring at his scanner. "No signal," he repeated quietly. "Receiver's dead." Miranda Kent kept her eyes on Elias. "Who exactly are you?" she asked again. He wiped his hands on a rag pulled from his jacket pocket. The gesture looked ordinary, something a maintenance worker might do after tightening a pipe valve. But the steadiness in his movements told a different story. "Someone who used to deal with problems like this," he said. Kent folded her arms. "That's not an answer. It's the one I've got." Morales glanced between them. "Chief, if the relay's grounded, the trigger can't fire remotely anymore." Kent nodded once. "Which means the device underneath that plate is now isolated." Morales swallowed. "And still very real," the reminder hung heavy in the air. Because the bomb was still there. The motorcade was still parked over it. And the bomb squad was still seconds away from arriving. Elias closed the lunch pail and clipped the latch again. Kent watched him carefully. "You interrupted a remote signal system in under 10 seconds, she said. "You identified a relay antenna from 30 feet away. You predicted the trigger configuration without opening the device." He shrugged faintly. "You get used to the patterns. That's not something a city maintenance worker gets used to. No." Kent stepped closer. "So let me try again," she said. "Who exactly are you?" Elias looked past her toward Lila. His daughter was standing beside 2 officers now, clutching the straps of her backpack, eyes locked on him with quiet trust. He sighed softly. "I used to be Army-O'd." Morales blinked. "Explosive ordnance disposal?" Elias nodded. Kent's expression sharpened. "For how long?" 10 years. Morales let out a low whistle. "That explains the signal loop." Kent ignored the comment. "Rank?" "Staff sergeant." "You retired?" "Eventually." Kent tilted her head slightly. "That's an interesting word choice." Elias didn't elaborate. A convoy of white bomb squad vans screeched to a halt at the far end of the plaza. Technicians jumped out immediately, pulling equipment cases from the rear doors. Kent glanced toward them. "They're here." Morales spoke quietly. "Chief, if Mercer's assessment is correct, we can't follow standard protocol." Kent nodded once. "I'm aware." The bomb squad leader approached quickly, helmet tucked under one arm. "Chief Kent," he said, "we've got a possible device under the utility plate." Kent gestured toward the ground. "That's correct." The technician looked down. "Remote trigger?" Elias answered before Kent could. "Was remote." The technician frowned. "Was?" Elias lifted the lunch pail slightly. Receivers grounded. The bomb tech stared at him. "You're telling me someone already disabled the transmitter?" Morales nodded toward Elias. "He did." The technician blinked again. "Who's he?" Kent answered this time. "Former EOD." The technician's expression changed instantly. "What's your read on the device?" he asked Elias. "Two-stage circuit," Elias replied. "Pressure failsafe under the plate." The technician crouched slowly. That would explain the loop. He examined the plate closely. A few seconds later, he nodded. "Yeah, shaved bolt head." Whoever planted this knew what they were doing. Kent crossed her arms again. "So what's our next move?" The technician looked up. "Normally, we'd lift the plate and disarm the primary charge." Elias shook his head immediately. "That triggers the failsafe." The technician paused. "You're sure?" "Yes." "How do we get to it then?" Elias pointed toward the service channel access 10 feet away. Through there, the technician followed the direction of his finger. "That hatch leads to the drainage tunnel." "Exactly." Kent frowned. "You're suggesting we access the device from underneath the street?" "Yes." The technician nodded slowly. "That would bypass the pressure trigger." Kent looked between the two men. "So the solution is crawling into a drainage tunnel under the presidential route." Elias met her gaze. "That's the safest approach." Kent didn't like the answer. It felt too fragile, too dependent on a stranger. But every piece of evidence so far said he was right. Morales spoke quietly. "Chief, if we follow his plan, the bomb squad can approach the device without touching the plate." Kent glanced toward the silent motorcade again. Armored vehicles filled with agents and the president himself, all waiting on the decision she made next. She looked back at Elias Mercer. "You're volunteering for this, aren't you?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." Kent's eyes narrowed.
"You're not on the bomb squad, no. You're not on my security team, no."
"And yet you want to crawl into a drainage tunnel under a presidential motorcade to disarm a bomb." Elias shrugged slightly. "I've done worse places." Morales looked impressed. The bomb technician looked relieved. Kent looked unconvinced. "Why?" she asked. Elias glanced toward Lila again. His voice softened slightly. "Because my daughter's standing 50 feet away." The answer hit harder than any technical explanation. Kent followed his gaze, the small girl watching from behind the barricade, waiting for her father to finish fixing whatever danger adults had allowed to appear. Kent exhaled slowly, then she made her decision. "Fine," she said. The bomb technician blinked. "Chief?" Kent pointed toward the drainage hatch. "Open it." Then she looked back at Elias. "You're not going alone." He nodded. "That's fair." Kent gestured toward Morales. "You're with him." Morales swallowed. "Yes, Chief." Kent stepped aside as officers moved to pry open the service hatch. The metal cover screeched as it lifted. Darkness yawned beneath the street. Elias picked up his lunch pail again. Behind him, Leela whispered quietly, "Dad." He glanced back. Her voice trembled just a little. "Be careful," he gave her a small smile. "Always am." The drainage hatch groaned as officers pulled it open. Rust scraped against concrete, echoing hollowly through the narrow channel beneath the street. A rush of stale air drifted upward, carrying the smell of damp metal, standing water, and old concrete. Elias stepped closer to the opening and looked down. A narrow ladder descended into darkness. Faint light from the plaza spilled into the tunnel below, revealing a shallow channel where water trickled slowly along one side. Agent Morales stood beside him, adjusting the strap of his tactical vest. "I've crawled through worse places," Morales muttered, peering down the shaft. Elias nodded. "Same." Behind them, Miranda Kent supervised the perimeter with sharp efficiency. "Motorcade stays locked," she ordered into her radio. "Nobody approaches the barrier line unless I say so." Secret Service agents acknowledged immediately. Across the plaza, cameras continued recording. Reporters whispered urgently, trying to understand why the presidential convoy had frozen in place. But the focus of the entire security operation had shifted to a maintenance worker holding a lunch pail. Kent watched Elias closely as he knelt beside the hatch. "You understand the device is directly above this tunnel," she said. "Yes. And if you're wrong about the pressure failsafe, it won't matter," Elias said calmly. Morales gave him a sideways look. Comforting. Elias offered the faintest hint of a smile. Kent stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You interrupt the relay signal, crawl under the device, and disarm the charge. That's the plan. And if something changes?" Elias met her eyes. "Then you evacuate the plaza." Kent studied his face again. The calm still unnerved her. "You're very certain. I'm very practiced." Morales exhaled slowly. "Well, guess we're doing this." Elias handed him a small flashlight from the lunch pail. "Stay behind me once we're down there." Morales nodded. Kent watched the exchange. "You're giving orders now?" "Just advice." Morales chuckled nervously. "I'll take it." Elias turned back toward the hatch. The ladder creaked as he placed his boot on the first rung. Cold metal pressed through the sole of his boot. He descended slowly. Each step carried him farther from the noise of the plaza above. The helicopters, the engines, the radios. Down in the tunnel, the sounds faded into muffled echoes. Morales followed behind him. The ladder rattled slightly under their combined weight. 10 feet down, Elias stepped off onto the damp concrete floor. Water trickled through the drainage channel, reflecting the beam of Morales's flashlight in wavering lines. Morales dropped beside him. "Well," he said quietly, scanning the tunnel, "this is cozy." Elias looked up. Directly above them, thick concrete formed the underside of the street. Somewhere above that slab sat the utility plate. And beneath it, the device. Elias crouched, opening the lunch pail again. Morales knelt beside him. "You're really carrying everything you need in there? Everything that won't trigger the circuit?" Morales nodded slowly. "Right." Above them, faint footsteps echoed across the street surface. Agents moving, waiting. Elias pulled a compact voltage tester from the lunch pail and ran it along the concrete ceiling. A faint beep responded. "There," he said quietly. Morales aimed the flashlight. A small metal conduit ran along the underside of the slab. "That's the feed line?" "Yes." Morales swallowed. "So the bomb's directly above that?" "Yes." Morales stared at the conduit. "All right, what's next?" Elias pulled the insulated pliers from the lunch pail. "We cut the feed." Morales blinked. "That simple?" "No." Elias angled the flashlight upward. "There's a secondary line." Morales leaned closer. Sure enough, a thinner wire ran parallel to the conduit. "Failsafe?" Elias nodded. "If the primary feed drops suddenly, the failsafe triggers." Morales let out a quiet breath. "So we can't just cut it, no?" Elias pulled a small roll of insulating tape from the lunch pail. "We bridge the current first." Morales watched carefully. You've done this before. Elias didn't answer. Instead, he carefully wrapped the copper wire around the conduit and the secondary line, creating a temporary bypass. Morales watched the movements. Steady, precise, no hesitation. How many of these did you disarm overseas? Morales asked quietly. Elias paused, then said, Enough. Morales nodded. The tunnel grew quiet again except for the trickle of water. Above them, the entire plaza waited. Elias tightened the last loop of copper wire. Okay, he said. Morales held the flashlight steady. What now? Elias lifted the insulated pliers. Now we cut the feed. Morales swallowed. You're awfully calm for someone about to snip a bomb wire. Elias glanced at him briefly. I'm calm because I've already seen the worst version of this. Morales didn't ask what that meant. Instead, he focused on the wire. Elias positioned the pliers carefully. The metal jaws closed around the conduit. For a moment, the tunnel felt impossibly quiet. Then, snap. The wire severed cleanly. Morales held his breath. Nothing happened. The voltage tester beeped once, then went silent. Elias exhaled slowly. Primary charge disabled. Morales blinked. That's it? Almost. Morales frowned. Almost? Elias pointed upward again. There's still the secondary detonator. Morales groaned softly. Of course there is. Above them, faint footsteps echoed again. Miranda Kent and the entire security team were waiting for confirmation. Morales looked at Elias. So what do we do about that one? Elias reached back into the lunch pail. Same thing we do with every backup trigger. He pulled out a small precision screwdriver. Then looked up at the concrete ceiling again. We make sure it never gets the chance to fire. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in Morales's hand as he held it against the concrete ceiling. Secondary detonator, he repeated quietly. Please tell me that's the last surprise. Elias didn't answer immediately. He crouched lower beneath the conduit, studying the narrow line of wiring running across the slab. The secondary line was thinner, tucked almost invisibly beside the reinforced cable channel. Someone had built this carefully. Not rushed, not sloppy, precise. Whoever planted this knew what they were doing, Morales whispered. Yes, Elias said. Morales swallowed. That's not comforting. Elias slid the precision screwdriver between the wire clamps holding the secondary line against the conduit. The metal scraped softly, echoing down the damp tunnel. Above them, faint vibrations carried through the concrete, footsteps shifting across the plaza, agents moving, radios murmuring, the entire presidential motorcade waiting on what happened beneath the street. Morales lowered his voice. So this backup detonator, Elias kept working. It fires if the pressure trigger fails. Morales grimaced. Meaning if someone lifts that plate... Yes. Morales nodded slowly, which the bomb squad would have done. Yes, meaning the entire motorcade would have. He didn't finish the sentence. Elias finally loosened the first clamp. The wire shifted slightly. Morales held the flashlight steadier. Okay, so how do we shut this one down? Elias pointed upward with the screwdriver. See that microcapsule? Morales leaned closer. A tiny metal cylinder sat embedded near the conduit joint. Yeah, that's the detonator. Morales stared at it. That thing's the size of a pencil eraser, it's enough. Morales exhaled slowly. Of course it is. Elias reached into the lunch pail again and pulled out a pair of thin insulated tweezers. Morales blinked. You just carry those around? Sometimes. Morales chuckled nervously. Maintenance work must be very interesting. Elias ignored the comment. Instead, he angled the tweezers upward carefully. Hold the light steady. Morales nodded. Got it. The tunnel felt impossibly still. Even the water trickling through the channel seemed quieter now. Elias slid the tweezers beneath the capsule housing. The metal clicked softly. Morales whispered, "That doesn't look safe." "It isn't. Fantastic." Elias steadied his breathing. Years of training resurfaced in muscle memory, slow hands, measured pressure, absolute focus. Above them, a helicopter thudded across the sky. The vibration hummed faintly through the concrete. Morales froze. Did that affect anything? No. Good. Elias adjusted the angle of the tweezers again. Almost there, Morales swallowed. "Tell me before you pull it." Elias gave a small nod. "Okay." A few seconds passed. Then, there, the capsule shifted free. Morales held his breath. Nothing exploded. No vibration. No shockwave. Just silence. Elias lowered the tweezers slowly. The tiny detonator rested between the metal tips. Morales stared at it. That little thing almost took out a presidential motorcade. Elias placed it carefully inside the lunch pail. Almost. Morales exhaled a long breath. "So, that's it?" Elias checked the wiring one more time. The conduit hung severed, the secondary line disconnected, the detonator removed. "Yes," he said. Morales leaned back against the tunnel wall, letting out a shaky laugh. "Unbelievable." Elias closed the lunch pail. "Let's tell them." Morales grabbed his radio. "Chief Kent," he said, voice steadying now. "This is Morales." Above them, the response crackled instantly. "Go ahead." Morales glanced at Elias, then spoke. "Primary charge disabled. Secondary detonator removed." A pause followed. Then Kent's voice returned. "Confirm the device is inert." Morales looked at Elias. Elias nodded. Morales spoke again, confirmed. "Device is safe." For a moment the radio stayed silent. Then Kent's voice returned again. "Understood." Even through the static, Morales could hear the relief. He looked at Elias. "You just saved a president." Elias shrugged slightly. "Saved everyone standing above us." Morales grinned. "Fair point." He turned toward the ladder. "Let's go tell them the street's not going to explode today." Elias picked up the lunch pail again. They climbed the ladder slowly. Each step carried them back toward daylight, back toward the waiting agents, back toward Miranda Kent, back toward the plaza where security had laughed at a poor single dad not 20 minutes earlier. Morales pushed the hatch open. Sunlight poured into the tunnel. Agents crowded the opening immediately. Morales climbed out first. "Clear," he announced. Elias followed him up. The plaza erupted in motion. Bomb technicians rushed forward. Secret Service agents began speaking rapidly into radios. Vehicles shifted. The frozen motorcade finally started moving again. Miranda Kent stepped toward Elias. Her expression was very different now. No irritation, no suspicion, just quiet recognition. "You disarmed it," she said. Elias nodded once. "Yes." Kent studied him carefully. The worn jacket, the dusty boots, the dented lunch pail. Then she glanced toward the barricade where Leela stood waiting. "You know," Kent said slowly, 20 minutes ago my security team was laughing at you." Elias looked toward his daughter. She heard them. Kent nodded. Yes, she turned toward the guard who had grabbed Elias earlier. The officer suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Kent faced Elias again. "You just prevented the worst security disaster this plaza has ever seen." Elias shrugged faintly. "Just doing what needed doing." Kent watched him for another moment. Then she said quietly, "I think the entire city deserves to know exactly who they were laughing at." The plaza was no longer frozen. Engines restarted along the presidential convoy, and Secret Service agents moved with renewed urgency now that the threat had been neutralized. Radios crackled constantly as teams confirmed the device was disarmed and the perimeter safe. But, despite the movement, a strange stillness lingered around Elias. Because everyone near the barricade had seen it. The man they had laughed at had just walked out of a drainage tunnel and stopped a disaster. Miranda Kent stood a few feet from him, watching quietly. Bomb technicians moved past them quickly, kneeling at the utility plate and carefully removing the remains of the device for analysis. Secondary trigger confirmed. One technician called out. If that plate had lifted, the failsafe would have detonated. Another tech glanced toward Elias. That guy was right. Kent heard the comment. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned toward the officers near the barricade. Clear a path. The officers stepped aside instantly. Across the barrier, Leela stood with 2 agents beside her. The moment the space opened, she ran toward her father. Dad, Elias crouched just in time to catch her as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "You said you'd be careful," she said into his shoulder. "I was," he replied gently. She pulled back, studying his face. "You fixed it?" "Yes." Her eyes brightened. "I knew you would." Kent watched the exchange with folded arms. There was something disarming about it. The same man who had crawled under a presidential motorcade to disarm a bomb was now kneeling in the street, letting a child hug him like the whole event had been routine. Morales walked over, still shaking his head in disbelief. "You realize what just happened, right?" he said. Elias shrugged. "We stopped a bomb." Morales laughed softly. "Yeah, that's one way to put it." Kent stepped closer. "Mr. Mercer." Elias stood again, Leela still holding his hand. "Yes?" Kent glanced briefly at the moving motorcade. The lead vehicles had begun rolling again, inching forward under tight escort. Agents signaled the all clear as the convoy slowly resumed its route through the plaza. "You just prevented an attack on the president," Kent said. Elias shook his head slightly. "On everyone here," Kent studied him. "You're not interested in recognition, are you?" "Not really." Morales chuckled. "That tracks." Kent turned toward the group of officers behind her. Several of them were the same guards who had laughed earlier. Their expressions now were very different, uneasy, ashamed. Kent spoke loud enough for them to hear. "This man warned you about the device before any of us realized the danger." No one spoke. Kent continued. "And instead of listening, you laughed." The silence deepened. The guard who had grabbed Elias earlier shifted awkwardly. Kent stepped closer to him. "What was it you said earlier?" she asked calmly. The guard swallowed. I don't remember." Kent's voice sharpened slightly. "I do." She turned back toward Elias. "You told him to move along because he was just maintenance." The guard looked at the pavement. Elias sighed softly. "It's fine." Kent shook her head. "No, it's not." She gestured toward the plaza. "Every person standing here right now is alive because the man you mocked knew something you didn't." The guard finally looked up. His voice was quiet. "Sir, I'm sorry." Elias met his eyes. The apology seemed genuine. "That's all right," Elias said. Kent studied him again. "You're very forgiving." Elias shrugged faintly. "I've been underestimated before." Morales laughed under his breath. "I bet." Across the plaza, reporters had begun shouting questions. Cameras pointed toward the barricade now. Word had already spread that a civilian had helped disable the device. Kent noticed the attention. "This situation is about to become very public," she said. Elias looked uncomfortable. "That's not necessary." Kent tilted her head. "Actually, I think it is." Morales grinned. "Oh, this should be good." Kent faced Elias directly. "Your name is Elias Mercer, yes. Former Army Eid, yes. Single father." Elias glanced at Leela. "Yes." Kent nodded slowly. "Then people deserve to know who saved them today." Elias opened his mouth to respond. But before he could, a group of Secret Service agents approached quickly. One of them spoke. "Chief Kent?" "Yes?" "The president would like a moment." Kent blinked. A moment with who? The agent gestured toward Elias. With him, Morales's eyebrows shot up. Well, that escalated. Elias shifted slightly. That's really not necessary. Kent gave a faint smile. I'm afraid it might be. The lead vehicle of the motorcade had stopped again. An agent opened the rear door. Cameras flashed wildly across the plaza. Leela looked up at her father. Dad. Elias sighed quietly. Yes? Is the president really coming over here? He glanced toward the vehicle. Then, back at her. Looks like it. Morales chuckled softly. You might want to keep that lunchbox. Kent folded her arms again. Something tells me the president would like to meet the man security laughed at, before his motorcade stopped. The plaza had gone quiet again, not the tense silence from earlier when everyone feared the street might explode. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that spreads when hundreds of people suddenly realize they've just witnessed something extraordinary. The rear door of the presidential vehicle opened. Secret Service agents moved first, scanning the surroundings out of habit even though the threat had already been neutralized. Then the president stepped onto the pavement. Cameras exploded in flashes. Reporters shouted questions across the barricades. But the president didn't look toward the press line. He walked directly toward Elias Mercer. Morales leaned toward Elias slightly. Well, he whispered, this is officially above my pay grade. Elias sighed quietly. Mine too. Lila squeezed his hand tighter. Dad, that's really him. I see that. Miranda Kent straightened slightly as the president approached. Sir? He nodded briefly to her. Chief Kent, then his eyes moved past her and settled on Elias. For a moment, the president simply looked at him, taking in the faded jacket, the dusty boots, the dented lunch pail still hanging from his hand. Finally, he spoke. You're Elias Mercer. Elias nodded once. Yes, sir. I'm told you disarmed the device under this street. With some help, the president smiled faintly. That's not what your bomb technicians just said. Morales shifted awkwardly behind Elias. They might have exaggerated a little, Elias said. The president shook his head. They didn't. He stepped closer. Do you know how many people were standing in this plaza today? Elias glanced briefly toward the crowd. Quite a few, more than 1,000. The president's voice was calm but heavy with meaning. My security team tells me the device placed here would have caused catastrophic casualties. Elias didn't answer. The president continued. And I'm told the only reason that didn't happen is because you noticed something nobody else did. Elias shrugged faintly. I've seen similar setups before. The president studied him carefully. Army odd, yes sir. How long did you serve? 10 years, and now you're working city maintenance. Elias looked toward Lila again. Life changes. The president followed his gaze, the small girl standing beside him. Her hand wrapped around his. You're his daughter? Lila nodded. Yes, sir. The president smiled warmly. You must be very proud of your father. She didn't hesitate. I always am. The surrounding agents chuckled quietly. The president looked back at Elias. You know, he said, when my motorcade stopped today, the first report I received was that security had detained a man near the barricade. Morales winced slightly. The president continued. I'm also told some members of that security team laughed at him. Miranda Kent's expression hardened slightly. Several officers behind her shifted uncomfortably. The president's gaze returned to Elias, and yet that same man is the one who saved everyone standing here. Elias shifted his weight slightly. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. The president gestured toward the plaza. But recognition matters. Elias frowned slightly. For what? For reminding people that value doesn't come from titles. The president turned slightly toward the group of officers who had mocked Elias earlier. Sometimes the people standing closest to the real work are the ones everyone else overlooks. The guard who had laughed earlier lowered his head again. The president turned back to Elias. "You didn't have to step forward today." Elias shrugged faintly. "My daughter was standing here." The president nodded slowly. "That explains a lot." He extended his hand. Elias hesitated for half a second, then shook it. Cameras flashed wildly again. The image spread instantly across every lens in the plaza. A president shaking hands with a maintenance worker holding a dented lunch pail. "You know," the president said quietly, "I've shaken hands with generals, CEOs, diplomats." He paused slightly. "But today I think I'm shaking hands with the most important man in this plaza." Elias smiled faintly. "I doubt that." The president gestured toward Lila. "I don't." Lila beamed. Morales leaned toward Kent again. Security laughed at the poor single dad. Kent nodded quietly. And then the president's motorcade stopped. Morales chuckled. Poetic justice. Kent looked toward Elias Mercer standing beside his daughter. More like overdue respect. For a few minutes, the plaza remained wrapped in flashing cameras and quiet amazement. The presidential motorcade had restarted, but not before the moment everyone present would remember long after the sirens faded, a president shaking hands with a man in work boots, a maintenance worker holding a dented lunch pail, a single father standing beside his daughter while the entire security perimeter watched. Eventually, the convoy began to roll again. Engines hummed to life, vehicles sliding back into formation with practiced precision. Secret Service agents moved with renewed calm now that the crisis had passed. But the atmosphere around Elias Mercer had changed completely. People weren't staring at him the way they had earlier. Before, the looks had carried amusement, dismissal. Now they carried something else. Respect. Miranda Kent stood nearby, watching the plaza settle. Bomb technicians finished securing the remains of the device, carefully packing the components into sealed containers for investigation. Officers reopened pedestrian paths, guiding crowds away from the barricades. The guard who had laughed earlier approached Elias slowly. His posture was different now, less rigid, less confident. "Mr. Mercer," he said quietly. Elias looked at him. "Yes?" The guard cleared his throat. "I wanted to apologize again." Elias gave a small nod. "You already did, I know." "But," the officer glanced toward Lila, "what happened earlier shouldn't have happened." Elias studied him for a moment. Then he said gently, "Everyone makes mistakes." The guard nodded, relieved but still embarrassed. "I'll remember today for the rest of my career." Elias smiled faintly. "That's probably a good thing." Nearby, Agent Morales leaned against the barrier with a tired grin. "I can't believe you walked into work today expecting to fix pipes," he said. Elias lifted the lunch pail slightly. "Still fixed something." Morales laughed. "That you did." Leela tugged on Elias's sleeve. "Dad? Yes, does this mean you're famous now?" Elias chuckled softly. "I hope not." But the president shook your hand. "Yeah, that's pretty famous." He crouched beside her again. "You know what's more important than that?" "What?" "That we still have dinner tonight." Her eyes brightened instantly. "Oh good, I'm starving." Morales laughed again. After disarming bombs, the man's biggest concern is dinner. Kent walked over, shaking her head slightly. "That might be the healthiest perspective I've seen all day." Elias stood again. "Well, the job's done." Kent nodded. "It is." She paused. "You know the city is going to want to talk to you, I figured. And the press." He grimaced slightly. "Less excited about that." Kent smiled faintly. "You might not have much choice." Elias glanced around the plaza. Reporters were already clustering near the outer barricades, waiting for a statement. He sighed. Figures. Kent extended her hand. "On behalf of this entire security operation, thank you." Elias shook it. "You're welcome." Kent studied him one last time. "You know, power tends to forget the people standing closest to the real work." Elias shrugged. "Doesn't have to." Kent nodded slowly. Then she stepped aside. The plaza continued returning to normal. Vehicles cleared. Officers relaxed their stances. The helicopters overhead finally drifted away. Elias took Leela's hand again. "Ready to head home?" She nodded eagerly. "Can we get pizza? I think we can manage that." Morales called after them as they started walking away. "Hey, Mercer." Elias turned. "You ever get bored fixing city pipes, you've got a place on the bomb squad." Elias laughed softly. "I'll keep that in mind." Leela waved goodbye to the agents. Several waved back. The man security had laughed and walked calmly out of the plaza with his daughter beside him. No spotlight. No speech. Just quiet dignity. But everyone who had been there would remember the moment. The moment when appearances collapsed. When a poor single dad in work boots turned out to be the most capable person in the entire plaza. And the moment the president's motorcade stopped because the man security mocked was the only one who knew how to save them. Stories like this remind us something powerful. Respect shouldn't depend on wealth, titles, or uniforms. Sometimes the strongest people are standing exactly where power never bothers to look. So tell me something. Have you ever seen someone underestimated, only to discover they were the most capable person in the room? Ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. They mocked the janitor carrying his daughter until the hospital CEO heard his real name. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next? You really expect us to believe you just found it? One of the residents said, eyes sliding over the maintenance worker's faded uniform. People don't return wallets like that unless they're hoping for something. They scoffed when the maintenance worker returned a luxury wallet he found on the marble steps. They didn't even thank him, just checked for missing cards and warned him not to linger near the residence. And he only nodded, calm as stone, like he'd been dismissed by people far more dangerous than them. Because he knew something they didn't, within 24 hours, the woman who sneered would hold the keys to his home. This is a story about how one quiet act of honesty can flip an entire power structure. Before I show you the exact moment when the deed was slid across a table in front of witnesses, and the same people who mocked him went silent, let me take you back to the day that wallet hit the ground. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What none of them saw was the fracture already running beneath polished stone and polished smiles. They thought this was about a wallet. It wasn't. It was about foundations, of buildings, of pride, of the fragile line between power and decency. Caleb Mercer stood there with his hands loosely folded behind his back, the posture of someone trained not to react when baited. He had grease beneath his nails and exhaustion beneath his eyes, but his voice, when he finally spoke, didn't waver. "I didn't take anything," he said quietly. "You can count it again." The lobby smelled of lemon polish and expensive perfume. Crystal light fixtures scattered reflections across the marble floor where he'd spotted the wallet minutes earlier, thick leather stamped with a gold insignia. He could have ignored it, could have left it for security. Instead, he'd picked it up and walked it straight to the concierge desk. Now the woman who owned it, Aria Vale, flipped through its contents with cool efficiency. Platinum cards. Driver's license. Cash folded with deliberate precision, nothing missing. Her expression didn't soften. "You understand," she said, not quite looking at him, "that this community values discretion. Discretion." The word lingered like a stain. He gave a single nod. "Yes, ma'am." Behind her, Victor Halden adjusted his cufflinks and leaned toward a small cluster of well-dressed guests. We have protocols for this, he murmured loudly enough for Caleb to hear. Maintenance staff should alert security, not insert themselves. Insert themselves. The words struck, but Caleb didn't flinch. He'd heard worse in boardrooms years ago, though none of these people would guess that from the man holding a toolbox by his side. A security guard finally cleared his throat. "Everything seems intact, Miss Vale." Arya slipped the wallet into her handbag. "Fine, thank you," she said, though the gratitude felt procedural, not personal. Then she turned away. Conversation resumed around her like he'd never been there. Laughter swelled. A champagne cork popped somewhere near the elevators. The world of tailored suits and investment portfolios moved on, and the maintenance worker became invisible again. He adjusted his grip on the toolbox and stepped back toward the service corridor. The air shifted immediately. Cool marble replaced by concrete walls, the faint hum of ventilation units replacing piano music. It was a place meant for labor, not leadership. As he walked, his eyes tracked the thin hairline crack near the base of a support column. It hadn't been there last month. Not like that. Not angled. His jaw tightened. Above him, heels clicked, and investors chatted about square footage and projected returns. Beneath them, something subtle was moving. He crouched, pressing calloused fingers lightly against the concrete seam. There it was again, the almost imperceptible vibration, a tremor most people would mistake for passing traffic. But traffic didn't run this close. Footsteps echoed behind him. Victor's voice drifted down the corridor. "Make sure you log that and don't overstep, Mercer. Stick to light fixtures and filters." Caleb rose slowly. "It's more than a fixture issue." Victor's smile was thin. "Your maintenance." The words were simple. Final. For a split second, something old stirred inside him. The instinct to argue with data, to dismantle assumptions with calculations and charts. He swallowed it. Not here, not yet. Instead, he nodded once. Understood. As Victor disappeared back toward the glittering lobby, Caleb glanced upward through layers of steel and concrete, imagining the weight resting on imperfect ground. He thought of Lila at home, her inhaler resting on the nightstand beside her bed. Thought of overdue notices stacked neatly in a kitchen drawer. Thought of how quickly stability could crack if the base wasn't solid. The building hummed faintly again beneath his boots, and this time he didn't imagine it. Caleb stayed crouched for a few seconds longer after Victor's footsteps faded, palm flat against the concrete seam. The vibration was subtle, like a truck passing far away but steady. Rhythmic. Wrong. Above him, laughter rolled across the marble. Down here, the air tasted like dust and metal. He stood slowly and jotted a note in the small, worn notebook he kept tucked inside his tool belt. The pencil he used was shaved down to half its size, the edges smoothed from years of use. Numbers came easily to him. Angles, load paths, stress points. He closed the notebook before anyone could wander back and see what he'd written. By the time his shift ended, the sun had dropped behind the skyline, turning the gated community's glass balconies into sheets of orange fire. He rode his bicycle through the side exit, reserved for staff, passing luxury SUVs lined up like trophies along the curb. The ride home took 12 minutes. His house sat just beyond the perimeter wall, close enough to hear construction equipment in the early mornings, far enough that the address didn't carry prestige. The paint along the porch railing peeled in thin strips. The mailbox leaned slightly to the left. Inside, the air smelled faintly of menthol. "Dad?" Leela's voice floated from the couch. "I'm here," he answered, stepping out of his boots by the door. She was curled beneath a faded blanket, a paperback book open on her lap. The nebulizer machine rested beside her, silent for now. He crossed the room in 3 strides and brushed her hair back gently. "How's your breathing?" Okay, she said, a little tight earlier. His jaw tightened just enough that only someone watching closely would notice. Construction dust again? She gave a small shrug. Probably. Probably. He moved to the kitchen and poured her a glass of water, eyes drifting to the stack of envelopes tucked neatly near the fridge. Red lettering. Final notice. He'd arranged them in a straight line as if order could make them less threatening. The house payment was 3 months behind. He hadn't told her that part. Instead, he returned to the couch and sat beside her. You finish your math? Yeah. It was easy. A smile tugged at his mouth. Of course it was. For a few quiet minutes, the only sound was the ticking clock on the wall and the faint rumble of distant machinery from the development site. He felt it even here, a low pulse through the floorboards. Most people wouldn't notice. He did. After she drifted off to sleep, he rose carefully and moved to the kitchen table. The notebook came out again. He sketched quickly foundation lines, soil displacement angles, estimated load stress based on the new luxury wing's footprint. His handwriting shifted unconsciously, becoming sharper. Technical. Precise. He stopped when headlights swept across the front window. A black sedan idled at the curb. He froze. The engine cut off. A car door opened. Caleb stepped onto the porch just as Aria Vale emerged from the driver's seat, her silhouette framed by streetlight. She wasn't dressed for a gala now, no champagne flute, no audience. Just tailored slacks and a quiet expression he couldn't quite read. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I didn't expect you to live this close, she said finally. He folded his arms loosely. It's convenient. Her gaze flicked toward the neighboring houses, then back to him. May I? He hesitated, just a second, then stepped aside. Inside, she took in the narrow hallway, the worn couch, the child's shoes near the door. Her eyes paused on the nebulizer machine. You returned something valuable today, she said quietly. It wasn't mine. A faint nod. No, it wasn't. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unspoken in the lobby earlier. He waited. I purchased this property this afternoon, she said. The words didn't land at first. They hovered in the air like dust particles in sunlight. You what? His voice stayed level, but something cold slid through his spine. It was scheduled for foreclosure auction next week, she continued. I acquired it through my firm. His pulse hammered once, hard. You're evicting us? No, she said quickly. That's not why I'm here. He studied her face, searching for calculation. For strategy. For leverage. I didn't buy it to remove you, she said. I bought it because of what you did. A sharp breath left him. Returning a wallet doesn't justify. It wasn't the wallet, she interrupted softly. It was how you stood there while they questioned you, and you didn't bend, he didn't respond. She reached into her bag and withdrew a folder. You'll stay, the mortgage is cleared. For now, he repeated. Her jaw tightened slightly. There are structural concerns at the development. I've been reviewing reports. Something isn't aligning. The distant rumble sounded again, faint but present. He met her eyes. You felt it too, she said. He didn't nod. But he didn't deny it either. Before I go further into what happened next, subscribe with the bell on, because what unfolded inside that development changed more than one foundation. Outside, somewhere beneath steel and soil, the earth shifted again, and this time they both heard it. The low vibration rolled beneath the floorboards like distant thunder, subtle but unmistakable. Aria's eyes shifted toward the window as if she could see through walls and soil to the source of it. That's not traffic, she said quietly. No, he replied. The word sat between them. She straightened slightly, composure slipping back into place like a tailored jacket. My engineering team hasn't reported anything critical. Then they're not looking in the right place. It wasn't defiance. It was a fact. Her gaze narrowed, not offended but calculating. Victor insists settlement readings are within acceptable variance. Caleb walked to the kitchen table and opened his notebook without asking permission. He turned it toward her. Clean angles. Load arrows. Stress distribution marks drawn in fast, confident strokes. The new wing extends over a mixed soil base, he said. Clay pockets. Saturation risk. If compaction wasn't reinforced properly, he let the sentence hang. Arya studied the sketches longer than she had studied his face in the lobby. You're speaking like someone who's done this before. I have. Silence again, not awkward. Heavy. Outside, a truck downshifted near the site. The ground answered with a faint tremor. Her jaw tightened. Why are you working maintenance? He closed the notebook. Life shifts. She absorbed that without pushing. I need certainty, she said finally. Not intuition. It's not intuition. Then prove it. There it was. Not dismissal. A challenge. He met her eyes. Access to the Foundation inspection reports. Soil surveys. Structural reinforcement plans. That information is restricted, so is collapse. A breath caught in her throat, barely visible. For a second, the woman who commanded boardrooms looked less certain than she had beneath crystal chandeliers. She thought of investors flying in for the open house this weekend, of contracts worth millions, of reputations that could fracture faster than concrete. If you're wrong, she said slowly, you're jeopardizing a development launch. If I'm right, he answered, you're jeopardizing lives. The weight of it shifted something in her expression. Upstairs, floorboards creaked softly as Leela turned in her sleep. The sound grounded him instantly. Everything circled back to that room. Arya followed his glance toward the staircase. Your daughter? Yes, she has asthma. It wasn't a question. He nodded once. Construction dust hasn't helped. A flicker of realization crossed her face. This wasn't just about architecture. It was about proximity, impact, the invisible cost of expansion. I didn't know the foreclosure was this close to the perimeter, she said quietly. You didn't look. The words weren't sharp. They were tired. Her shoulders lowered slightly. No, I didn't. Another tremor hummed through the house, longer this time. A glass in the cabinet gave a faint rattle. Arya turned toward the sound. That vibration shouldn't carry this far, she murmured. It shouldn't, he agreed. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at the screen. Victor's name flashed across it. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked back at him. The open house is in 48 hours. I know. I can't cancel it without evidence. Then don't cancel it, he said. Her brow furrowed slightly. What are you suggesting? Let it proceed. The word surprised even her. And? She pressed. And make sure I'm there, she studied him carefully. As maintenance, as insurance. A faint, almost reluctant smile touched the corner of her mouth. You're confident. No, he said. I'm cautious. Her phone buzzed again. She silenced it this time. If I grant you limited access, she said, you'll keep this quiet. I'm not interested in headlines. What are you interested in? He didn't hesitate. Keeping the ground stable, another silence. But this one felt different, collaborative, dangerous in its possibility. Finally, she extended her hand, not in the dismissive, transactional way from the lobby, but deliberately. I'll authorize temporary access to archived reports in the basement control room, she said. You'll have 1 hour tomorrow morning before staff arrives. He shook her hand. Firm. Steady. Thank you, he said. Her grip tightened just slightly. Don't thank me yet. Headlights swept across the window again as another vehicle passed toward the site. The night air carried the faint metallic scent of machinery cooling down. Arya stepped toward the door. Victor can't know until I know, she said quietly. He won't hear it from me. She paused at the threshold. If you're right, he held her gaze, then this isn't just a construction issue, she finished. No, he said softly, it's a foundation issue. She nodded once and stepped outside. The door closed with a muted click. Caleb stood still for several seconds, listening to the sedan's engine start and fade into the distance. His pulse was steady, but beneath it ran something sharper. Anticipation. He turned back to the kitchen table, opened the notebook again, and began recalculating based on expanded access. Load thresholds. Event crowd weight. Worst-case scenario projections. Above him, Leela coughed lightly in her sleep. He paused, listening until the sound faded. Then he wrote one final figure in the margin. 48 hours. The building wasn't the only thing under pressure. By dawn, Caleb was already inside the gated complex, the sky still bruised purple over the skyline. Arya's temporary clearance code had worked. The service elevator granted him quiet passage to the basement control level before most of the staff arrived. The air underground felt colder than usual. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he unlocked the archive cabinet Arya had authorized. Stacks of inspection reports sat in neat chronological order, each stamped and signed. On the surface, everything looked compliant. Reinforcement logged, soil tests passed, settlement within range. He pulled the soil survey first. Mixed substrata. Clay pockets confirmed. His jaw tightened. He flipped to the reinforcement addendum. The original plan called for deeper pilings along the north wing, exactly where the luxury expansion now stood. The approved revision reduced depth by nearly 18%. 18%. He didn't need a calculator for what that meant. A faint tremor shivered through the exposed pipes overhead, dust loosening from a seam near the ductwork. He glanced up instinctively. The vibration amplitude felt stronger this morning. He photographed the relevant pages with his phone, then cross-referenced the settlement readings from the last 30 days. The numbers told a story the signatures didn't. Gradual increase, minor deviations, enough to ignore until they weren't. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. He closed the cabinet just as Victor rounded the corner. Well, Victor said smoothly, adjusting his tie. Didn't expect to see you down here so early. Routine checks, Caleb replied. Victor's gaze drifted to the cabinet. Archives aren't part of routine. They are if you know what you're looking for. A tight smile. Careful. That almost sounded like authority. The tremor returned, brief but sharper this time. Even Victor paused. What was that? He muttered. Ground shift, Caleb said evenly. Victor scoffed. You've been saying that for weeks. Because it's been happening for weeks. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. The open house is tomorrow. Investors are flying in tonight. Whatever theory you're building, keep it to yourself. It's not a theory. It's speculation from a maintenance tech. There it was again. The label. The ceiling placed over his credibility. Caleb didn't rise to it. If the north wing takes concentrated load from event traffic, stress distribution won't compensate. Victor blinked once. You're out of your depth. I'm not. Victor's expression hardened. Stay in your lane. The words echoed long after Victor walked away. Caleb remained still until the footsteps disappeared. Then he reopened the cabinet and slid one more report from the file, vibration sensor data from the subfloor network. Most staff didn't even know the sensors were there, installed years ago for seismic insurance compliance. He scrolled through the readings on the adjacent monitor. Spike. Minor spike. Higher spike. All within acceptable parameters if you weren't watching the pattern. He was. He took one final photograph and closed everything carefully. When he stepped back into the service elevator, he felt the tremor again, faint but insistent, as if the structure itself were clearing its throat. Upstairs, preparations for the open house were already underway. Catering staff wheeled in silver trays. Event planners adjusted floral arrangements under crystal chandeliers. A string quartet tuned their instruments near the atrium. Polished shoes crossed freshly waxed marble. Caleb moved through the edge of it all, invisible again in his uniform. He paused near a support column beneath the north wing balcony. His fingers brushed the surface lightly. There, another hairline fracture, longer now. Arya appeared from the executive office hallway, speaking quietly into her phone. She stopped when she saw him. "Update," she said once she ended the call. He handed her his phone without ceremony.